When you think of a computer, you probably think of one of these, or maybe, nope, something like this, or maybe, I don't know if this works anymore, I don't care. When you think of computers, you probably think of something like this, or maybe one of these guys instead, but Apple says your next computer might look a little something like this. This is the 2020 iPad Pro, and Apple says it's your new computer, but also not a computer, so yeah, okay, I'll play along. This is, however, the most powerful tablet Apple has ever made, and it comes closer than ever to actually working like a proper laptop, so let's take a closer look. Before we get to that though, just a quick bit of housekeeping. If you saw my last video about the iPad Pro, then you probably noticed the audio was god-awful. I am very sorry about that. Things have been a little crazy, but I think we're moving in the right direction. Also, the most exciting part of Apple's iPad Pro announcement wasn't the iPad Pro so much as it was the crazy $300 plus Magic Keyboard, which won't be available until May. So today we're just focusing on the iPad Pro itself. I've been testing the top of the line 12.9-inch model with LTE and 1 terabyte of storage, which means this iPad costs $1,650 plus tax. That is more money than either of the computers I just showed you. Yes, the base level 11-inch 128 gig iPad Pro starts at a more reasonable $800, but this whole thing begs the question. If these things cost as much as computers, should you buy an iPad Pro instead of one? I can answer that one right now for just about all of you. No. These are great companion devices, and the iPad Pro in particular does a great job of bridging the gap between smartphones and proper PCs, but I am sure even Apple would prefer if you bought an iPad and a MacBook instead of just an iPad. What's really interesting though is that Apple is giving iPads the tools to act more like laptops anyway, but we will get to that. First though, we need to talk about performance. I've got to be blunt, this new iPad is not that much faster than the model it replaces, and if all you're doing on this big, beautiful 12.9-inch display is watching videos and writing emails, you probably won't notice a difference at all. That's not to say Apple didn't do anything though. According to the company, they tweaked the thermal architecture and updated the performance controllers, both of which are changes meant to help the iPad deal with more sustained heavy loads. And while the 8 CPU cores appear to be unchanged from last year, Apple also updated its GPU for the new model. Last year's A12X Bionic had 7 GPU cores, while this year's A12Z Bionic has 8, which doesn't sound like much, but when you factor in the Metal API that allows developers to get really fine-grained low-level access to these GPUs, every new core does help. I've been gaming pretty heavily on this thing, and titles like Fortnite and Shinsekai Into the Depths ran fantastically well, but I figured you guys might want a little more technical rigor than that, so we ran a handful of benchmarks on the new iPad Pro, and the results are basically what I expected. Single core and multi-core CPU performance hardly changed compared to the 2018 model, but Geekbench's compute test, which does lean pretty heavily on that GPU, shows a clear, if not exactly massive bump in the new iPad's favor. To really get a sense of the power the new iPad Pro had to offer, I had it and a bunch of other devices convert a series of 4K 60 and 4K 24 clips of the ghost town that is Manhattan now into a YouTube-friendly 1080p video at 30 frames per second. The 2020 iPad did the job in just about 5.5 minutes. To put that in perspective, last year's iPad Pro did it in 7, the iPhone 11 Pro did it in just under 10, and my work issue 2018 MacBook Pro took 18.5 minutes. So yeah, there is a performance difference here, but unless you're a creator or a video editor or an engineer trying to work with really large CAD files, you're really going to have to go looking to find it. While we're talking about the value of tweaked hardware, we should probably dig into what's going on with this camera system. In addition to a 12 megapixel wide sensor with an f1.8 aperture, the new iPad Pro also has a new 10 megapixel ultra-wide camera that captures a 125-degree field of view. They are fine. Neither of them are iPhone 11 Pro caliber, but the main camera, in fairness, does get pretty close sometimes. The ultra-wide isn't half bad, but the results aren't really great either. They're noticeably softer and just a little less satisfying overall. Oh, and a note for creators, you can shoot video at resolutions as high as 4K at 60 frames per second on either camera, but you can't switch between the two while you're already recording, which remains kind of annoying. Frankly, I'm not going to dwell on these cameras for two reasons. One, the phone in your pocket will almost certainly do a better job, and two, I am one of those people who finds taking pictures with tablets kind of ridiculous. And besides, the last new sensor Apple added this year is easily the most interesting. It's a tiny LiDAR scanner, and I do mean tiny. It's about 1 millimeter or so. Long story short, LiDAR scanners can see spaces around them by emitting light and calculating how long it takes for that light to bounce back. Self-driving cars rely on them pretty heavily, and now so does your favorite augmented reality software. The really neat bit is that existing AR apps don't need to be modified in any way to benefit from the LiDAR. If they use ARKit, they just work faster and better. Take IKEA, for instance. I tried using its AR furniture app to put some new chairs in my living room, and those virtual objects stayed rooted into place better than they did when I tried on an iPhone 11 Pro. Because of that, they felt more present and real, even though I know they were neither of those things. I got similar results after playing a few rounds of Angry Birds AR. It took much longer, plus a lot of panning around for the iPhone 11 Pro to tell the difference between flat open space and my furniture, but the iPad Pro figured out where I could and couldn't place a level in an instant. The jump in AR performance here is real, and the fact that there is an actual super small LiDAR array in a tablet is pretty amazing, honestly. Still, I can't help but think few people will actually notice or benefit from that LiDAR for now, especially since developers haven't had the chance to get really creative with it yet. More than anything, this sensor is a great example of Apple trying to set itself up for future success rather than provide immediate practical value. I know what you all really want to hear about though, the trackpad situation. As of the iPadOS 13.4 updates, all modern iPads, including this new model I'm testing, have full, surprisingly elegant trackpad support. Honestly, I was a skeptic at first, but Apple made the experience feel surprisingly natural, like this control scheme has been part of the iPad for years. Just connect the trackpad of your choice via Bluetooth, fiddle with a few settings for cursor speed and scroll direction, and then you just go. There are two things about using a trackpad on the iPad that really stand out to me. First is the speed. The small circular cursor whips around and essentially acts like your finger touching the screen without actually having to take a beat, reach up, touch the screen yourself, and put your hand back down. That sounds really minor, I know, but for me at least, those extra motions just tend to gum up the flow of whatever it is I was trying to do, and now I don't have to worry about that. Multi-touch gestures also help keep things moving pretty quickly. A 3-finger swipe up takes you back to the home screen, 3-finger swipes side to side cycle you through your open apps, a 2-finger tap acts as a right click and you can click on the clock in the corner to access Control Center. The list goes on. It won't take you long to get a hang of things, especially if you're used to using a trackpad on a Mac. And once you do get a hang of things, you start whipping through your tasks very quickly. More importantly, that cursor you control constantly adapts to what's around it. It'll become a classic iBar thing when you hover over text, making it really easy to select just what you need and nothing else. And when you get close to one of iPadOS's interface elements, like a menu button in an app, the cursor just sort of latches onto it. It's really simple. As I've said, Apple's approach feels very natural, but it's important to note that it's not exactly perfect. While I was editing my review photos, for instance, I noticed that some of Lightroom's menu options wouldn't actually respond to a touch on the trackpad. I had to reach up and work on the screen instead. Google's productivity apps didn't really work with iPadOS's trackpad text selection either, which made editing my story kind of a hassle. All told, having more ways to control the iPad is a great thing, just don't think that this update will be enough to justify you ditching your old PC. For that to happen, Apple would have to dramatically reshape the iPadOS experience, which I guess based on what we've seen with trackpad support, they're at least partially amenable to. All we can really do now is stay tuned. Maybe we'll get some big new iPadOS updates at WWDC, unless that gets canceled. The rest of the new Pro experience is basically the same as the old one. This big screen is beautiful and fantastic, and so is the Apple Pencil, which doesn't appear to benefit from any new software. I've been able to use this iPad Pro for just under 11 hours of work and play off a single charge, and that USB-C port is still tremendously handy for importing photos, or connecting external storage, or even mirroring your iPad screen onto another display. All told, the 2020 iPad Pro is a fantastic tablet and a better deal than before now that Apple made 128 gigs of storage the floor. It's only going to get better too once Apple starts adding more to iPadOS and developers figure out what they want to use this LiDAR for. If you own the last iPad Pro though, you don't need this thing. Important features like trackpad support are already available through a software update. But if you've always been curious about the iPad Pro or just want a properly premium tablet, you will not do better than this. It won't replace your computer yet, but don't be surprised if the idea starts to sound a little more reasonable after you start using this thing.